A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Book the Second, The Golden Thread. Chapter 3, A Disappointment. Mr. Attorney General had to inform the jury that the prisoner before them, though young in years, was old in the treasonable practices which claimed the forfeit of his life. That this correspondence with the public enemy was not a correspondence of today, or of yesterday, or even last year or the year before. That it was certain the prisoner had, for longer than that, been in the habit of passing and repassing between France and England on secret business of which he could give no honest account. That, if it were in the nature of traitorous ways to thrive, which happily it never was, the real wickedness and guilt of his business might have remained undiscovered. That Providence, however, had put it into the heart of a person who was beyond fear and beyond reproach to ferret out the nature of the prisoner's schemes, and, struck with horror, to disclose them to His Majesty's Chief Secretary of State, the most honourable Privy Council, that this patriot would be produced before them, that his position and attitude were, on the whole, sublime, that he had been the prisoner's friend, but at once, on an auspicious and an evil hour, detecting his infamy, had resolved to immolate the traitor he could no longer cherish in his bosom, on the sacred altar of his country, that if statues were decreed in Britain as in ancient Greece and Rome, to public benefactors, this shining citizen would assuredly have had one. That, as they were not so decreed, he probably would not have one. That virtue, as had been observed by the poets in many passages which he well knew the jury would have word for word at the tips of their tongues, whereat the jury's countenances displayed a guilty consciousness that they knew nothing about the passages, was in a manner contagious, more especially the bright virtue known as patriotism or love of country, that the lofty example of this immaculate and unimpeachable witness for the crown, to refer to whom, however unworthily, was an honour, had communicated itself to the prisoner's servant, and had engaged him in a holy determination of example, his master's table drawers and pockets, to secrete his papers, that he, Mr. Attorney General, was prepared to hear some disparagement attempted of this honourable servant, but that, in a general way, he preferred him to his, Mr. Attorney General's, brothers and sisters, and honoured him more than his, Mr. Attorney General's, father and mother, that he called with confidence on the jury to come and do likewise, that the evidence of these two witnesses, coupled with the documents of their discovering that, would be produced, would show the prisoner to have been furnished with lists of His Majesty's forces, and of their disposition and preparation, both by sea and land, and would leave no doubt that he had habitually conveyed such information to a hostile power, that these lists could not be proved to be in the prisoner's handwriting, but that it was all the same, that indeed it was rather the better for the prosecution, as showing the prisoner to be artful in his precautions, that the proof would go back 5 years and would show the prisoner already engaged in these pernicious missions, within a few weeks before the date of the very first action fought between the British troops and the Americans, that for these reasons the jury, being a loyal jury, as he knew they were, and being a responsible jury, as they knew they were, must positively find the prisoner guilty and make an end of him, whether they liked it or not, that they never could lay their hands upon their pillows, that they never could tolerate the idea of their wives laying their heads upon their pillows, that they never could endure the notion of their children laying their heads upon their pillows. In short, that there never more could be for them or theirs any laying of heads upon pillows at all, unless the prisoner's head was taken off. That head, Mr. Attorney General concluded by demanding of them, in the name of everything he could think of, with a round turn in it, and on the face of his solemn asseveration that he already considered the prisoner as good as dead and gone. When the Attorney General ceased, a buzz arose in the court as if a cloud of great blue flies were swarming about the prisoner in anticipation of what he was soon to become. When it toned down again, The unimpeachable patriot appeared in the witness box. Mr. Solicitor General then, following his leader's lead, examined the patriot, John Barsad, gentleman by name. The story of his pure soul was exactly what Mr. Attorney General had described it to be. Perhaps, if it had a fault, a little too exactly. Having released his noble bosom of its burden, he would have modestly withdrawn himself, but that the wigged gentleman, with the papers before him, sitting not far from Mr. Lorry, begged to ask him a few questions. The wigged gentleman, sitting opposite, still looked at the ceiling of the court. Had he ever been a spy himself? No, he scorned the base insinuation. What did he live upon? His property. Where was his property? He didn't precisely remember where it was. What was it? No business of anybody's. Had he inherited it? Yes, he had. From whom? Distant relation. Very distant? Rather. Ever been in prison? Certainly not. Never in a debtor's prison? Didn't see what that had to do with it. Never in a debtor's prison? Come once again? Never? Yes. How many times? 2 or 3 times. Not 5 or 6? Perhaps. Of what profession? Gentleman. Ever been kicked? Might have been. Frequently? No. Ever kicked downstairs? Decidedly not. Once received a kick on the top of the staircase and fell downstairs of his own accord. Kicked on that occasion for cheating at dice? Something to that effect was said by the intoxicated liar who committed the assault, but it was not true. Swear it was not true? Positively. Ever live by cheating at play? Never. Ever live by play? Not more than other gentlemen do. Ever borrow money of the prisoner? Yes. Ever pay him? No. Was not this intimacy with the prisoner in reality a very slight one, forced upon the prisoner in coaches, inns, and packets? No. Sure he saw the prisoner with these lists? Certain. Knew no more about the lists? No. Had not procured them himself, for instance? No. Expect to get anything by this evidence? No. Not in the regular government pay and employment to lay traps? Oh dear, no. Or to do anything? Oh dear, no. Swear that? Over and over again. No motives, but motives of sheer patriotism. None whatever. The virtuous servant Roger Cly swore his way through the case at a great rate. He had taken service with the prisoner in good faith and simplicity 4 years ago. He had asked the prisoner abroad the Calais packet if he wanted a handy fellow, and the prisoner had engaged him. He had not asked the prisoner to take the handy fellow as an act of charity, never thought of such a thing. He began to have suspicions of the prisoner and to keep an eye on him. Soon afterwards, in arranging his clothes while traveling, he had seen similar lists to these in the prisoner's pockets over and over again. He had taken these lists from the drawer of the prisoner's desk. He had not put them there first. He had seen the prisoner show these identical lists to French gentlemen at Calais, and similar lists to French gentlemen both at Calais and Boulogne. He loved his country, and couldn't bear it, and had given information. He had never been suspected of stealing a silver teapot. He had been maligned respecting a mustard pot, but it turned out to be only a plated one. He had known the last witness 7 or 8 years. That was merely a coincidence. He didn't call it particularly curious coincidence. Most coincidences were curious. Neither did he call it a curious coincidence that true patriotism was his only motive too. He was a true Briton, and hoped there were many like him. The blue flies buzzed again, and Mr. Attorney General called Jarvis Lorry. Mr. Jarvis Lorry, are you a clerk in Tellson's Bank? I am. On a certain Friday night in November 1775, did business occasion you to travel between London and Dover by the mail? It did. Were there any other passengers in the mail? 2. Did they alight on the road in the course of the night? They did. Mr. Lorry, look upon the prisoner. Was he one of the 2 passengers? I cannot undertake to say that he was. Does he resemble either of those 2 passengers? Both were so wrapped up, and the night was so darkened. We were all so reserved that I cannot undertake to say even that. Mr. Lorry, look again upon the prisoner. Supposing him wrapped up as these 2 passengers were, Is there anything in his bulk and stature to render it unlikely that he was one of them? No. Will you not swear, Mr. Lorry, that he was not one of them? No. So at least you say he may have been one of them? Yes, accepted. I remember them both to have been, like myself, timorous of highwaymen, and the prisoner has not a timorous air. Did you ever see a counterfeit of timidity, Mr. Lorry? I certainly have seen that. Mr. Lorry, look once more upon the prisoner. Have you seen him to your certain knowledge before? I have. When? I was returning from France a few days afterwards, and at Calais the prisoner came on board the packet ship in which I returned and made the voyage with me. At what hour did he come on board? A little after midnight. In the dead of the night. Was he the only passenger who came on board at that untimely hour? He happened to be the only one. Never mind about happening, Mr. Lorry. Was he the only passenger who came on board in the dead of the night? He was. Were you travelling alone, Mr. Lorry, or with any companion? With two companions, a gentleman and a lady. They are here. They are here. Had you any conversation with the prisoner? Hardly any. The weather was stormy, and the passage long and rough, and I lay on a sofa almost from shore to shore. Miss Manette, the young lady to whom all eyes had been turned before, and were now turned again, stood up where she sat. Her father rose with her, and kept her hand drawn through his arm. Miss Manette, look upon the prisoner. To be confronted with such pity and such earnest youth and beauty was far more trying to the accused than to be confronted with all the crowd, standing as it were apart with her on the edge of his grave. Not all the staring curiosity that looked on could for the moment nerve him to remain quite still. His hurried right hand parcelled out the herbs before him into the mahogany beds of flowers in the garden, and his efforts to control and steady his breathing shook the lips from which the colour rushed to his heart. The buzz of the great flies was loud again. Miss Manette, have you seen the prisoner before? Yes, sir. Where? On board the packet ship just now referred to, sir, and on the same occasion. You are the young lady just now referred to. Oh, most unhappily I am. The plaintive tone of her compassion merged into the less musical voice of the judge as he said something fiercely. Answer the questions put to you, and make no remark upon them. Miss Manette, had you any conversation with the prisoner on the passage across the channel? Yes, sir. Recall it. In the midst of a profound stillness, she faintly began. And there we will pause.